In 2 weeks, Europe will delete 90% of its crypto industry. That's not a baseless prediction, and it's not one of those Brussels consultations that drags on for a decade. It's a hard deadline, and the date is July 1st. ESMA reconfirmed it just a couple of days ago. There are no extensions and no exceptions. And here's why this is a massive problem. 7.6 million crypto app downloads in Europe last year went to platforms that aren't on any MiCA register. That's 41% of all downloads. So there's a very high chance that the exchange or crypto app on your phone right now is on the wrong side of this line. In other words, your money might be sitting somewhere that becomes illegal overnight. So today I'll show you exactly what this deadline does, the staggering numbers behind this coming purge, and precisely what happens to your money after July 1st. My name is DC and you're watching The Coin Bureau. Now, before we get into who survives and who doesn't, you need to understand what this deadline actually does. MiCA stands for Markets in Crypto Assets, the EU's single rulebook for the entire crypto industry. When its core rules became applicable on December 30th, 2024, it started an 18-month clock. That clock was a grace period, a transitional window where firms holding old national registrations could keep operating while they applied for a full MiCA license. And this window shuts on July 1st, 2026 under Article 143 of the regulation. And here's the mechanic that traps people. A pending application protects nobody. Only a granted license counts. Put simply, if your exchange has submitted its paperwork but hasn't actually received the green light by July 1st, it is operating illegally the moment that clock hits zero. ESMA spelled this out in a formal statement on April 17th this year, and the language was brutal. Any entity providing crypto services to EU clients without a MiCA license is in breach of EU law and must cease offering those services. And crucially, that applies whether or not a member state has even finished implementing the rules domestically, which brings us directly to the numbers that justify the 90%. Now, I want to be clear on this. What Europe is about to do to its own crypto industry is a genuine extinction level event. Before MiCA, there were somewhere between 1,200 and 2,700 registered crypto firms across the EU, depending on how you count them. As of June 2026, the number that have actually secured full authorization, around 210. That's a survival rate of somewhere between 7 and 18%, and even at the generous end of that range, you're looking at the vast majority of the industry simply vanishing overnight. But it gets even worse. Of those 210 authorized firms, only 14 hold the specific high-tier license required to actually run a trading platform across the EU. And this authorization category is precisely the one your favorite exchange needs to legally let you trade. Around 10 EU member states have issued 0 licenses so far, including Italy, Poland, Romania, and Greece. Germany alone accounts for about 53 of the total, roughly 30% of every authorization in Europe. So this is the picture. An industry of over 1,000 firms collapsing down to 210 with real exchange power concentrating into just 14 platforms. Now, you might assume this is somebody else's problem, that the big name exchange you actually use is obviously fine. Well, it pains me to say that is not accurate because the odds are not in your favor. OKX Europe ran an analysis using sensor tower download data between May 2025 and May 2026. In that window, Europeans downloaded around 18.5 million crypto apps, and approximately 7.6 million of those were for platforms with no MiCA authorization whatsoever. When you layer in web traffic and search data on top of that, OKX estimates that roughly 60% of European crypto users are currently engaging with platforms that hold no license. As OKX Europe CEO Errol Goes put it, those 7.6 million downloads are just the tip of the iceberg. And most users have no clue their exchange is operating without any license. So before you assume you're safe, understand that statistically, most of the people based in Europe that are watching this video are not. Which brings us directly to the question that actually matters for your portfolio. What happens to your money when the platform goes dark? After July 1st, an unlicensed exchange serving EU clients has to do several specific things. First, it has to cease offering services immediately. Then it has to actively offboard you, meaning it has to notify you and remove you from the platform. After that's done, it has to facilitate the transfer of your assets either to a licensed firm or to your own self-custody wallet. And lastly, it has to block EU access entirely. As wild as this sounds, this isn't theoretical. This is already happening. In late May, the Dutch broker Knaken simply halted all activity leaving customers unable to access their funds. That is what an unlicensed shutdown looks like in practice. And the penalties for firms that ignore the deadline are designed to end them. As stated in Article 111, administrative fines run up to 5 million euros or 5% of global annual turnover. To make matters worse, because operating past the deadline is treated as a continuing breach, those fines will compound over time. But France has gone even further. The AMF, France's regulator, has explicitly warned of criminal prosecution with exposure of up to 2 years imprisonment and $30,000 in criminal fines. AMF President Marie-Anne Barbar-Liani said it's becoming, and I quote, very, very urgent for firms to finalize their applications. Her colleague confirmed the AMF is already asking unlicensed firms to put orderly cessation plans in place right now. So the risk to Europeans isn't just inconvenience, it's that platforms facing criminal exposure have every incentive to pull the plug before the deadline rather than risk being caught operating on the wrong side of it. And that brings us to a specific asset sitting in millions of European wallets that's already detonating: USDT. Tether, the company behind USDT, the single largest stablecoin on the planet with a market cap of around $188 billion, never sought MiCA authorization, and it has publicly indicated it has no intention to. Tether CEO Paolo Arduino argues that MiCA's requirement to hold 60% of reserves in European bank deposits, a threshold that applies to stablecoins, classifies as significant, which USDT would clearly meet, actually creates systemic risk rather than reducing it. Whatever the reasoning, the consequence is concrete. Under MiCA stablecoin rules, a licensed exchange legally cannot offer USDT to EU customers, and the big players have already moved. Coinbase began delisting USDT for European users back in December 2024. Kraken put it in sell-only mode and then suspended it entirely. Crypto.com froze buying access in January 2025. Binance applied geofencing to its USDT pairs across the region in March 2025, and the result of all of this, USDT trading volume on EU venues fell over 70% between late 2024 and mid-2025. As BitGo's CEO Mike Belshi warned, EU-regulated exchanges face a binary choice: delist USDT or risk regulatory sanction. So what stands in its place? USDC. Circle's dollar stablecoin with a market cap of around $75 billion and EURC, its euro equivalent, are pretty much the only two compliant heavyweights left standing. If you're holding USDT on a European platform right now, that is a position with a fuse on it. Now look, on paper, MiCA is one rulebook for all of Europe, so naturally you would expect order, but in practice, it's pure chaos. And Poland is the perfect example. Poland had the largest pre-MiCA crypto sector in the entire EU, with hundreds of registered firms, far more than any other member state. And here's the problem: Poland's domestic implementing legislation was vetoed by its president in December 2025, then vetoed again in February 2026. A revised bill was only sent for signature on May 22nd, just 6 weeks before the EU deadline. Without that legislation in place, Poland's regulator literally lacked the legal basis to process a single license application. So picture this: the largest crypto sector in the EU faces the July 1st cliff with zero ability to get licensed at home and an EU clock that does not care about their domestic gridlock. And the unevenness goes further. Some countries used the full 18-month runway. France, Malta, Spain, and Luxembourg all kept their doors open right up to the deadline. Others slammed them shut early. The Netherlands closed its national transition on June 30th, 2025, a full 12 months ahead of schedule. Germany and Austria shut theirs at the end of December 2025. So, depending purely on which country your exchange happened to be based in, it either had a year and a half to comply or it ran out of road early. And there's one more trap worth knowing. Some offshore exchanges think they can dodge this by claiming EU users came to them voluntarily, something called reverse solicitation. But ESMA's guidelines define solicitation so broadly that SEO, social media posts, influencer campaigns, and referral programs all count. A disclaimer on a website does not save you. That loophole is closed. Now, for the part most of the coverage completely misses, the real objective behind this 90% purge is the consolidated market they plan to build on the other side. Because when you collapse an industry of over 1,000 firms down to 14 trading platforms, cleaning up the market simultaneously hands the survivors a monopoly over the entire displaced user base. Think about that asymmetry for a second. Roughly 60% of European crypto users are on unlicensed platforms today. So every one of those users has to land somewhere licensed, and there are only 14 venues fully cleared to catch them. That is the single largest forced migration of users and assets in the history of European crypto, compressed into a single deadline. And as always, we should absolutely believe this is purely about protecting the little guy. Of course, right, because nothing says consumer protection quite like funneling millions of users into a handful of the largest, most well-capitalized incumbents on Earth, while the startups that couldn't afford the compliance bills simply disappear. As one former industry head put it, MiCA applies the same rules to a tiny startup and an international group with no real adjustment for size. The honest truth is that regulation written this way inevitably wipes out the small startups right alongside the bad actors. And the firms with the deepest pockets and the best lawyers don't just survive the wall, they inherit what's on the other side of it. So for you, this means you've got a narrow window to act. First, verify your exchange's status and do it today right after this video. Check the official ESMA register or your national regulator directly, and crucially, verify the specific legal entity serving your country, not just the brand name. Second, watch your inbox and your app for offboarding notices right now. Look for language like service termination, account migration, or withdrawal deadline, because once that window opens, the clock on accessing your funds is already running. Third, decide where your assets go, a licensed platform or a self-custody, and remember that transfers over 1,000 euros to a private wallet now legally require the exchange to collect your wallet data under the travel rule. Fourth, deal with USDT specifically. If you're holding it on an EU platform, convert it to USDC or EURC, or move it to self-custody because a non-custodial wallet doesn't need MiCA license. And fifth, do not wait until July 1st. Liquidity thins and spreads widen as the deadline approaches. KYC queues on licensed platforms back up, and platforms facing criminal exposure may shut down before that date, not on it. So is this 90% purge the moment European crypto finally grows up, a cleaner, safer market built on a single rulebook that institutional money can actually trust? Or is it the moment regulators quietly handed the entire continent's crypto economy to 14 incumbents dressed up in the language of consumer protection? I genuinely want to know where you land, because I know where I do. Please get properly opinionated in the comments below. I'll make sure to read all of them. And if you want to track every offboarding notice, every license granted, and every exchange that breaks ranks as this unfolds in real time, our Telegram channel is exactly where we break it all down daily. The link is in the description, and right now, with this deadline closing in, it's genuinely worth joining. Because this is only part one. The real story is what happens on the other side of that wall. Which exchanges survive, which ones consolidate power, and exactly what you need to do before the offboarding notices start landing. This will be part 2, dropping right after July 1st, when we will know precisely who made the cut and who didn't. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC, signing off.